The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the ornate corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal history. Kate Middleton walked slowly down the hallway, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished marble floors. She had been living this royal life for over a decade now, but some days still felt like she was walking through a dream that belonged to someone else. Today was different, though. Today carried a weight that pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The phone call from the palace physician still rang in her ears from the night before. The words had been clinical, professional, but the meaning behind them had shattered something inside the royal family that might never be repaired. Charles sat in his private study, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched beyond the castle grounds. His hands, once strong and steady, now trembled slightly as they rested on the mahogany desk where his mother had once signed important documents. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now occupied the same chair, facing challenges that seemed insurmountable. The diagnosis had come as a shock to everyone. Cancer. The word hung in the air like a dark cloud that refused to move. Charles had always been the picture of health, maintaining his active lifestyle well into his 70s. He had gardened, traveled, fulfilled his royal duties with the energy of someone half his age. Now, sitting in the quiet sanctuary of his study, he felt every one of his years weighing down on him. Kate knocked gently on the door before entering. She had learned over the years to read the moods of the royal family, understanding when to approach with caution and when to offer comfort. Charles looked up as she entered, and she could see the fear in his eyes that he tried so hard to hide from the public, from the press, from his own family. "Your Majesty," she said softly, using the formal address even in private moments like these. Old habits and royal protocol died hard, even when dealing with family matters that cut to the very core of their humanity. "Kate, please, just Charles," he replied, his voice carrying a weariness that hadn't been there just weeks before. "I think we're past formalities at this point." She moved closer to his desk, noting how the morning light seemed to highlight every line on his face, every gray hair that spoke of the burden of leadership he had carried for so many years. The transition from Prince of Wales to King had not been easy, and now this diagnosis threatened to cut short a reign that had only just begun. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. It was a simple question, but in the context of their current reality, it carried enormous weight. Charles managed a weak smile. "Some days are better than others. Today I'm trying to figure out how to tell Anne. She's been through so much already, and now this." His voice broke slightly on his sister's name. Princess Anne had always been the strong one, the one who kept the family grounded when the storms of public scrutiny threatened to tear them apart. She had weathered scandals, divorces, deaths, and public criticisms with a stoic grace that made her the backbone of the royal family. But even the strongest foundations could crack under enough pressure. Kate understood the delicate dynamics at play and had been protective of Charles since they were children, always standing up for her older brother when palace politics or public opinion turned against him. The news of his illness would devastate her in ways that even she might not be prepared to handle. "She loves you," Kate said simply. "Whatever happens, that won't change." Charles nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. The weight of the crown came with many burdens, but perhaps none heavier than the knowledge that your personal struggles affected not just your family, but an entire nation. Every decision, every treatment, every public appearance would be scrutinized and analyzed by millions of people around the world. The treatment options had been explained to them in detail by the medical team. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, a long road ahead with no guarantees. Charles had faced many challenges in his life, from the collapse of his marriage to Diana, to the years of waiting to become king, to the constant pressure of public expectations. But this felt different. This was a battle he couldn't win through diplomacy or public relations. Kate reached across the desk and placed her hand gently over his. It was a small gesture, but in that moment it bridged the gap between royal protocol and human compassion. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the gardens where Charles had spent countless hours finding peace and solitude. "I keep thinking about my mother," Charles finally said. "How she faced her own mortality with such dignity. She never let the public see her weakness, never showed fear even when she must have been terrified." Queen Elizabeth II had indeed been a master of composure, maintaining her regal bearing through decades of personal and political challenges. Her death had left a void in the royal family that went beyond the loss of a monarch. She had been their anchor, their source of wisdom and strength. "You don't have to be her," Kate said gently. "You don't have to carry this alone." But Charles knew that wasn't entirely true. The nature of kingship meant that certain burdens could only be carried by the person wearing the crown. The public would look to him for stability and reassurance, even as he faced his own fears and uncertainties. The morning wore on, and gradually other members of the household began their daily routines. Kate could hear the distant sounds of staff preparing for the day ahead. Meetings to attend, official duties to fulfill, a kingdom to run despite the personal crisis unfolding behind closed doors. As she prepared to leave Charles to his thoughts, she paused at the door. There were so many things she wanted to say, words of comfort and encouragement that seemed inadequate in the face of such overwhelming circumstances. Instead, she simply said, "We're here for you, all of us." Charles watched her go, grateful for her presence and support. Kate had brought a unique perspective to the royal family, understanding both the pressures of public life and the importance of maintaining connections to the world beyond palace walls. Her marriage to William had been more than just a union of two people. It had been a bridge between tradition and modernity, between the ancient institution of monarchy and the changing expectations of contemporary society. Alone again in his study, Charles returned his attention to the gardens outside. Somewhere in those same grounds, his sister was probably already engaged in her own morning routine, unaware that her world was about to change forever. The conversation he needed to have with her loomed ahead like a mountain he wasn't sure he had the strength to climb. The weight of secrets had always been part of royal life. Information was carefully controlled, released to the public only when absolutely necessary, and always with consideration for the greater good. But this secret felt different, heavier somehow, more personal. This wasn't about politics or policy. This was about family, about love, about the fragile nature of human life that no amount of wealth or privilege could protect against. Charles picked up a photograph from his desk, a candid shot of him and from their childhood, both laughing at something beyond the frame of the picture. They looked so young, so carefree, unaware of the responsibilities and sorrows that would come with adulthood. He wondered what that young boy would think of the man he had become, of the challenges he now faced. The morning sun climbed higher, filling the study with warm light that should have been comforting, but somehow felt melancholy. Soon, very soon, he would have to find the words to tell his sister that the brother she had always protected now faced a battle she couldn't fight for him. The conversation that would change everything was still ahead, waiting like a storm on the horizon that could no longer be avoided. Princess Anne had always been an early riser, finding solace in the quiet hours before the rest of the world awakened. This particular morning found her in the castle's stable yards, checking on the horses that had been her constant companions throughout her life. The familiar sounds and smells of the stables provided a grounding presence that helped her navigate the complexities of royal duty. She moved with practiced efficiency among the stalls, her hands gentle but confident as she examined each horse. Riding had been her escape since childhood, the one place where she could shed the weight of expectations and simply be herself. The horses didn't care about titles or protocol. They responded to kindness, consistency, and genuine care, qualities that Anne had cultivated throughout her life. As she worked and reflected on the recent changes within the family, Charles's coronation had been a magnificent spectacle, but she had seen the stress it placed on her brother. The transition from heir to sovereign was never easy, and Charles had waited longer than any previous heir in British history. Now, at an age when most people consider retirement, he was taking on the most demanding job in the kingdom. The stable master approached with the morning reports, detailing the care and exercise schedules for each horse, and listened carefully, asking questions and offering suggestions born from decades of experience. This attention to detail had characterized her approach to all aspects of royal duty, from her extensive charity work to her role as patron of numerous organizations, and had carved out her own unique position within the royal family, earning respect through hard work and dedication rather than seeking popularity through media attention. She had weathered personal scandals and public criticism with characteristic stoicism, never allowing external pressures to compromise her core values or commitment to service. The morning routine continued as usual, and couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. There had been an unusual number of hushed conversations among the staff recently, and she had noticed that Charles seemed more withdrawn than normal. Her protective instincts, honed over decades of being the only daughter in a family of boys, were telling her that something was wrong. After finishing her work in the stables, and made her way back toward the main castle. The grounds were beginning to come alive with the daily activities of the household staff. Gardeners tended to the flower beds, security personnel made their regular patrols, and various officials arrived for their scheduled appointments. It was a well-orchestrated dance that played out every day, maintaining the smooth operation of one of the world's most famous residences. As she walked, and thoughts turned to her mother's final years. Elizabeth II had faced her declining health with remarkable dignity, and had seen the private moments of frailty that the public never witnessed. The burden of watching a loved one struggle with mortality was something she had hoped not to face again so soon after losing her mother. The request to meet Charles in his study came through one of the private secretaries. Nothing unusual in that. Siblings in the royal family often had informal meetings to discuss family matters or coordinate their various duties. But something in the secretary's manner suggested this was more than a routine conversation, and arrived at the study to find Charles standing by the window, his posture reflecting a tension she hadn't seen since the difficult days following their mother's death. The room, usually filled with the comfortable clutter of books and personal mementos, felt somehow hollow this morning. "And thank you for coming," Charles said, turning to face her. She immediately noticed how tired he looked, as if he hadn't slept properly in days. "You look terrible," she said with typical directness, and had never been one to dance around difficult subjects, preferring honest communication to polite evasion. Charles managed a weak smile. "Always straight to the point. I've missed that about our conversations." They settled into the comfortable chairs by the fireplace, a seating arrangement that had hosted countless family discussions over the years, and waited patiently for Charles to gather his thoughts, recognizing the signs that he was struggling with how to begin. "There's something I need to tell you," he finally said. "Something that will affect all of us, but especially you," and felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. In her experience, conversations that began this way rarely brought good news. She had learned over the years to prepare herself for the worst while hoping for the best, a survival mechanism developed through decades of navigating royal crises. Charles took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been diagnosed with cancer. The doctors discovered it during my routine physical last month. We've kept it quiet while exploring treatment options, but it's time the family knew." The words hit, and like a physical blow. She had prepared herself for many possibilities. Another scandal, political complications, family disputes, but not this. Not the possibility of losing another family member to illness so soon after losing their mother. For a moment, the room fell completely silent, and stared at her brother, trying to process information that seemed impossible to accept. Charles, who had always been the picture of health and vitality, who had spent years waiting for his moment to serve as king, was now facing a battle for his very life. "What type?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind, and had always believed that information was power, and in crisis situations, details mattered. Prostate cancer, but it spread to nearby lymph nodes, Charles replied. The prognosis is cautiously optimistic if we act quickly and aggressively. And absorb this information with the same methodical approach she brought to all challenges. Treatment options, timelines, implications for royal duties. Her mind automatically began cataloging the various factors that would need to be considered and managed. "How long have you known?" she asked. 2 weeks. We wanted to have a complete understanding of the situation before involving the family, and felt a flash of anger at being kept in the dark. But she quickly suppressed it. This wasn't about her feelings. This was about supporting her brother through the most difficult challenge of his life. The conversation that followed was painful, but necessary. Charles outlined the treatment plan that had been developed by his medical team, a regimen of surgery and chemotherapy that would significantly impact his ability to fulfill royal duties over the coming months. They discussed the need to gradually inform other family members and eventually make a public announcement, and listened carefully to every detail, asking questions that demonstrated both her concern for Charles's well-being and her understanding of the broader implications for the monarchy. She had spent her entire life in service to the institution, and she knew that personal crises had to be managed with consideration for their public impact. "What do you need from me?" she asked finally, cutting through all the medical terminology and logistics to the heart of the matter. "I need you to help hold the family together," Charles replied. "You've always been the strong one, and when everything else falls apart, you're still standing." And felt the weight of this request settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. Throughout their lives, she had been the one family members turned to in times of crisis. Her reputation for level-headedness and practical wisdom had made her the unofficial family mediator and problem solver. But this felt different from previous challenges. This wasn't about managing public relations or navigating political complications. This was about facing the fundamental fragility of human life, about confronting mortality in a way that no amount of preparation could make easier. "The children will need to know soon," and said, thinking of William and Harry, of a younger generation of royals who would be affected by this news. "Yes," Charles agreed. "Kate has been incredibly supportive already. I think William suspects something, but we haven't told him directly yet." And thought about Kate's unique position within the family. As someone who had married into the royal family rather than being born into it, Kate brought an outsider's perspective that could be invaluable during times of crisis. Her experience navigating public scrutiny while maintaining her connection to ordinary life made her a bridge between the rarefied world of royalty and the real concerns of everyday people. The morning sunlight continued to stream through the study windows, but the warmth it brought felt distant and irrelevant, and found herself remembering childhood moments with Charles, times when they had supported each other through the various challenges of growing up in the public eye. Those memories felt both precious and painful now, reminders of simpler time when their biggest worries involved schoolwork and teenage anxieties. As the conversation continued and began to understand the full scope of what lay ahead, the treatment would be intensive and time-consuming, requiring Charles to step back from many of his royal duties. Other family members would need to increase their workload to compensate. The public would eventually need to be informed, and their reaction would need to be carefully managed. But beyond all the practical considerations lay a more fundamental challenge: how to maintain hope and strength in the face of uncertainty, and had always prided herself on being able to handle whatever life threw at her. But this situation tested the limits of even her considerable resilience. The morning was slipping away, and both siblings knew that soon they would have to return to their public roles, putting on the composed faces that the world expected from members of the royal family. But for now, in the privacy of Charles's study, they could simply be brother and sister facing an uncertain future together. The days following Charles's revelation passed in a blur of medical consultations, family meetings, and carefully managed communications, and found herself thrust into a role she had never wanted, but always known might one day be necessary. That a family coordinator during a major crisis. Her calendar, already packed with royal duties and charitable obligations, now included regular strategy sessions about how to handle the king's illness while maintaining the stability of the monarchy. Kate had become an unexpected ally during these difficult days. Her perspective as both an insider and relative newcomer to the family proved invaluable as they navigated the complex dynamics of royal life during a health crisis. She understood the public's expectations while also recognizing the family's need for privacy and space to process their emotions. The two women had developed a working relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting the family. Kate's natural empathy complemented Anne's practical approach to problem-solving, creating a partnership that helped bridge generational and stylistic differences within the royal household. William had been told about his father's diagnosis 3 days after Anne, and his reaction had been a mixture of shock, determination, and barely controlled anger at being kept in the dark initially. As heir to the throne, he understood better than most the implications of Charles's illness for the future of the monarchy. The conversation with his father had been emotional, but ultimately strengthening their relationship in ways that years of formal interactions had never achieved. Harry's situation remained complicated by his physical distance and the ongoing tensions within the family. The decision about when and how to inform him about Charles's condition had sparked lengthy discussions among the senior royals. Eventually, Charles had insisted on making the call himself, leading to their first substantive conversation in months. The medical team had outlined an aggressive treatment plan that would begin within the week. Surgery would be followed by several rounds of chemotherapy, with the entire process expected to take at least 6 months. During this time, Charles's ability to fulfill his royal duties would be severely limited, requiring other family members to step up and assume additional responsibilities, and had already begun adjusting her own schedule to accommodate increased royal duties. Her reputation for efficiency and no-nonsense approach to royal obligations made her the natural choice to represent the king at many events. However, she was also aware that taking on too much could compromise her ability to support Charles emotionally during his treatment. The question of public disclosure remained sensitive and complex. The palace communications team had developed several scenarios for announcing the king's illness, each with different timelines and levels of detail. The balance between transparency and privacy was delicate, particularly given the intense public interest in royal health matters following Queen Elizabeth's final years. Kate's role in these discussions had surprised some of the more traditional palace staff. Her insights into public perception and media management reflected both her own experience under intense scrutiny and her understanding of how modern audiences consumed royal news. She advocated for a more open approach than some advisors recommended, arguing that honesty would ultimately serve the family better than attempts to control information, and found herself respecting Kate's judgment more with each passing day. The younger woman had faced her own challenges since joining the royal family, navigating everything from tabloid speculation about her background to intense pressure to provide an heir to the throne. She had handled each challenge with grace while maintaining her authentic personality, a balance that Anne recognized as both difficult and admirable. The emotional toll of the situation was perhaps most evident in the quiet moments between official duties. Anne had always prided herself on emotional control, but she found herself struggling with feelings of helplessness that were foreign to her nature. Throughout her life, she had solved problems through action and determination. Cancer, however, was an enemy that couldn't be defeated through royal protocol or sheer force of will. Charles's first surgery was scheduled for the following Monday, a procedure that would remove the primary tumor and provide more information about the cancer's progression. The weekend before felt suspended in time, with family members gathering at Windsor for what everyone hoped would be a routine medical procedure, but feared might be something more significant. Kate arrived early Saturday morning with William and their children. The grandchildren's presence brought a welcome distraction from the heavy atmosphere that had settled over the castle. Charles had always been an enthusiastic grandfather, and spending time with the young royals reminded everyone of what they were fighting to preserve, and watched as Kate managed the complex dynamics of keeping the children entertained while allowing the adults space to process their emotions. It was a delicate balancing act that required constant attention to multiple needs and personalities. Kate moved through these responsibilities with apparent ease, and could see the strain in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. The conversation that would later become the defining moment of this difficult period began innocuously enough, and had joined Kate in the castle's informal sitting room while the children played in the adjacent nursery. They could hear the sounds of laughter and play, providing a cheerful counterpoint to their more somber discussion about arrangements for the coming week. "How are you holding up?" Kate asked, settling into one of the comfortable armchairs that had been arranged around the fireplace, and considered the question carefully. Throughout her life, she had been the one asking others about their well-being, taking on the role of family caretaker and support system. Being on the receiving end of such concern felt unfamiliar and slightly uncomfortable. "I'm managing," she replied, which was her standard response to most inquiries about her personal state. Kate's expression suggested she wasn't satisfied with this diplomatic answer. "This must be incredibly difficult for you. Charles has been such a constant in your life." The simple observation hit, and harder than she had expected. Charles hadn't just been her brother. He had been her closest family member since childhood, her partner in navigating the complexities of royal life, her companion through decades of public service. The possibility of losing him felt like contemplating the amputation of a vital part of herself. "We've always looked out for each other," and said quietly. "When we were children, and even now, the idea that I might not be able to protect him from this." Her voice trailed off as she struggled with emotions she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge publicly. Kate waited patiently, recognizing that sometimes the most valuable thing you could offer someone was simply your presence and attention. The afternoon wore on as they discussed practical matters and shared memories of Charles's kindness and dedication to his family and country. Kate's perspective on Charles as a father-in-law added dimensions to Anne's understanding of her brother that she hadn't fully appreciated before. Through Kate's eyes, she saw Charles not just as the dutiful heir who had finally become king, but as a man who had worked hard to break cycles of emotional distance that had characterized previous generations of royals. As evening approached, the family gathered for dinner in one of the castle's smaller dining rooms. The atmosphere was subdued but warm, with conversation focusing on light topics that provided relief from the weight of the coming week. Charles seemed more relaxed than he had in days, perhaps finding comfort in being surrounded by the people he loved most. After dinner, as family members began to disperse to their respective quarters, Kate found herself walking with and through the castle's portrait gallery. The faces of previous monarchs and their families gazed down at them from ornate frames, silent witnesses to centuries of royal triumphs and tragedies. "He's going to be okay," Kate said suddenly, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised both of them, and stopped walking and turned to face her sister-in-law. "How can you be so certain?" Kate was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because he has too much left to do. Charles has waited his entire life for the chance to serve as king. He's not going to let cancer take that away from him." It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of Kate's understanding of Charles's character and determination. Throughout their relationship, she had observed his unwavering commitment to duty and his deep sense of responsibility to the institution he would lead. These qualities, which had sometimes made him seem distant or overly formal, now appeared as sources of strength that might help him fight for his life, and felt something shift inside her as Kate's words sank in. For days, she had been focused on the medical statistics and treatment protocols, approaching her brother's illness with the same methodical analysis she brought to all challenges. But Kate's perspective reminded her of the human element that no medical textbook could quantify. Charles's own will to survive and continue serving his country. As they resumed walking through the gallery, and found herself sharing memories of Charles that she rarely discussed with anyone. Stories of his kindness to staff members, his private charitable works that never received public attention, his struggles with the burden of expectations that had shaped his entire life. Kate listened intently, gaining insights into the man she knew as a father-in-law, and understanding better the brother who meant so much to. And the weekend passed quietly, with family members alternating between normal activities and hushed conferences about the week ahead. Sunday evening brought a family dinner that felt simultaneously ordinary and momentous, perhaps the last normal family gathering they would have for months. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, as if the weather itself reflected the somber mood within Windsor Castle. Charles had been awake since before dawn, partly from pre-surgery nerves and partly from the medication regimen that had disrupted his normal sleep patterns. He had spent the early hours in quiet reflection, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment and the uncertain path that lay ahead. The medical team arrived at the castle precisely on schedule, their professional efficiency providing a reassuring counterpoint to the emotional turbulence of the family. Dr. Sarah Morrison, Charles's primary oncologist, had been carefully selected not just for her medical expertise, but for her experience dealing with high-profile patients who require discretion and sensitivity along with excellent care, and had positioned herself as the family coordinator for the day, ensuring that everyone knew their roles and responsibilities while Charles was undergoing surgery. She had arranged for William and Kate to handle any urgent royal business that might arise, while she remained at the hospital to liaise with the medical team and provide updates to other family members. Kate's presence had become increasingly important too, and over the past week. The younger woman's calm demeanor and practical approach to crisis management had proven invaluable during the chaotic days of planning and preparation. More than that, Kate seemed to understand intuitively when and needed space to process her emotions, and when she needed someone to simply sit with her in companionable silence. The drive to the private hospital took place in a convoy of discreet vehicles, with security arrangements that had been planned down to the smallest detail. Charles traveled in the lead car with his personal physician, while Kate followed in a second vehicle with the necessary paperwork and personal items Charles would need during his recovery. During the drive, Kate made a decision that would later prove to be the turning point in Anne's emotional journey. She had been watching Anne's stoic facade for days, recognizing the signs of someone struggling to maintain control while facing their deepest fears. The words she spoke were simple, but they carried the weight of profound understanding and compassion. And Kate said quietly as their car navigated through London traffic, "He knows how much you love him. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." The statement was delivered without fanfare or dramatic emphasis, but it cut through Anne's carefully constructed emotional barriers like a knife through silk. For the first time since learning of Charles's diagnosis, Anne felt the tears she had been holding back begin to flow freely down her cheeks. The breakdown that followed was both devastating and cathartic. All the fear, anger, and helplessness that Anne had been suppressing for days came pouring out in a flood of emotion that she couldn't control or contain. She wept for her brother, for her family, for the uncertainty that had invaded their lives like an unwelcome intruder. Kate didn't try to stop the tears or offer empty reassurances. Instead, she simply moved closer to Anne in the back seat of the car and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, providing the kind of human comfort that transcended royal protocol or social barriers. In that moment, they were not sister-in-laws navigating palace politics. They were two women supporting each other through a crisis that threatened someone they both loved. The security detail in the front seat maintained professional discretion, understanding that what they were witnessing was a private moment of vulnerability that would never be discussed outside the confines of the car. This kind of emotional support was part of their job description in ways that went beyond simple physical protection. Anne's tears continued for several minutes as weeks of suppressed emotion finally found release. She cried for the little girl she had been, who had always tried to protect her older brother from playground bullies and family disappointments. She cried for the woman she had become, who had spent decades being strong for everyone else and rarely allowing herself moments of weakness. Most of all, she cried for the uncertain future that might rob her of the person who had been her closest companion and confidant throughout their shared journey of royal life. As the emotional storm gradually subsided and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of relief at having shared her burden with someone who understood. Kate's simple observation had given her permission to stop being the unshakable pillar of strength and just be a sister who was terrified of losing her brother. "I'm sorry," Anne said as she accepted the tissues Kate offered. "This isn't like me." "Don't apologize for being human," Kate replied gently. "You've been carrying everyone else's emotions along with your own. Even you have limits." The rest of the drive passed in comfortable silence, with Anne gradually regaining her composure while Kate provided quiet companionship. By the time they reached the hospital and had dried her tears and was ready to resume her role as family coordinator, but something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. The emotional wall that had existed between them had been permanently lowered, replaced by a bond of mutual understanding and support. Charles's surgery lasted 4 hours, during which Kate maintained a vigil in the private family waiting area that had been prepared for their use. Other family members came and went throughout the day, but the two women remained constant presences, taking turns updating everyone on the medical team's periodic reports. Dr. Morrison emerged from the operating room looking tired, but cautiously optimistic. The surgery had gone well, she reported, with the primary tumor successfully removed and no immediate complications. The pathology results would take several days, but initial observations suggested that the cancer had not spread as extensively as originally feared, and felt a wave of relief so profound that her knees nearly buckled. Kate was immediately at her side, providing both physical and emotional support as they absorbed the first piece of genuinely good news they had received in weeks. Charles's recovery would still be long and difficult, with months of chemotherapy ahead, but the successful surgery represented a crucial first victory in his battle against cancer. As they were escorted to his recovery room, Anne found herself thinking about Kate's simple statement that Charles had too much left to do to let cancer defeat him. Perhaps she had been right about the power of determination and purpose in fighting illness. The man they found in the recovery room looked pale and fragile, surrounded by monitors and medical equipment that emphasized his vulnerability. But his eyes were alert when they opened, and his first words were questions about family members rather than concerns about his own condition. "How is everyone holding up?" Charles asked weakly, his voice hoarse from the anesthesia, and felt fresh tears threatening as she realized that even in his weakened state, Charles's first priority was taking care of others. It was both frustrating and deeply moving. This man who had just undergone major cancer surgery was still worried about everyone else's well-being. "We're fine," she said firmly, taking his hand in hers. "Your job right now is to focus on getting better." Charles squeezed her hand with what little strength he could muster. "I know this has been hard on you, and you've always taken care of everyone." Kate stepped forward from where she had been standing quietly near the foot of the bed. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "you don't need to worry about us. We're taking care of each other." The simple statement carried layers of meaning that both Charles and Anne understood immediately. It was an acknowledgement of the support system that had developed during the crisis, a recognition of the bonds that had been strengthened through shared adversity. Over the following days, as Charles began the slow process of recovery, the family settled into new routines built around hospital visits, medical consultations, and modified royal duties. and found herself leaning on Kate's support more than she had ever relied on anyone outside her immediate family, while Kate discovered in and a source of wisdom and strength that helped her navigate her own fears about the future. The public announcement of Charles's illness came 2 weeks after the surgery, carefully crafted to provide necessary information while maintaining appropriate privacy about medical details. The response from the British public and the international community was overwhelmingly supportive, with thousands of letters and messages arriving at the palace each day. And Kate worked together to manage the flood of correspondence, developing a system for categorizing and responding to the most significant communications. The work provided a constructive focus for their nervous energy while they waited for the results of Charles's pathology tests and the beginning of his chemotherapy treatment. The pathology results, when they finally arrived, brought mixed but generally encouraging news. The cancer appeared to be responding well to treatment, with clear margins around the surgical site and no evidence of spread to other organs. The planned chemotherapy regimen would proceed as scheduled, but the prognosis was significantly more optimistic than originally projected. As spring turned to summer, Charles gradually resumed limited royal duties while continuing his treatment. His appearances were carefully scheduled around his medical appointments, with and other family members covering the events he couldn't attend. The coordination required constant communication and flexibility, but the family had developed efficient systems for managing the additional workload. Kate's role during this period evolved naturally from supporter to essential family member in ways that went beyond her marriage to William. Her emotional intelligence and practical skills made her invaluable in managing both family dynamics and public expectations during a time of unprecedented challenge for the modern monarchy. The bond between and Kate, forged during those difficult early days of Charles's illness, became a source of strength for the entire family. Their partnership demonstrated that royal families, like all families, could find new sources of support and connection during times of crisis. Charles's recovery would ultimately take the better part of a year, with good days and difficult days that tested everyone's resilience and patience. But the family that emerged from this trial was stronger and more connected than before, having discovered that vulnerability and mutual support could coexist with duty and public service. The quiet line that Kate had spoken in the car that rainy Monday morning, reminding and that she didn't have to carry her burdens alone, had opened a door to deeper understanding and genuine partnership that would serve both women and their family for years to come. Sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come not from grand gestures or dramatic moments, but from simple words spoken with perfect timing and genuine compassion.